In the previous diagram, what we were looking at really is this spend profile. Again, we're talking about cash flow over time, but here, rather than looking at the cumulative cash flow, which the previous diagram had, we're looking at the incremental cash flow. That is, if we were to split the time up into weeks, let's say, and we looked at the spend during each week, then the rate of spend will generally, in the product development, design and development process, will speed up initially and then slow down. If you go back to the S-curve, the previous overhead, then we're talking about the same spend in here, but we're representing, instead of adding it up as previously, we're showing it incrementally over the duration of the product design and development process. So we then come to launch again, and if we look at the blue here, then we move from negative, that is the budget for the development process, into positive cash flow, which is the profitability from sales. So that's this part. This part, from launch to when we replace the product, is known as the product life cycle, whereas the part before it obviously is the product development process. Okay, so this is when we initiate, then that's when we launch, that's when we replace. That period could be a number of years perhaps, depending upon the type of product. Now you'll notice that this curve doesn't go through the origin. It's probable after launch that the net cash flow is still negative. That's because we're having to fill up the supply to the customer. We're still advertising and promoting. So we probably don't start making any money, and then probably not too much, until some little time after we've launched the product. Now if we consider the activities that are being undertaken down here, yeah, we know what they are. They're design and manufacturing engineering and all those things. That's what's going on over here. And if we take a considerable time to develop new products, then it's likely that some activities will be critical, that is, that they have to be done on time because there's no float or slack, and other activities have spare capacity, spare time at the end, and they can be done sequentially, one after the other. Now over time, what has happened is that the life cycle duration out here has tended to be reduced for most products. Now of course the life cycle of a product depends upon the type of product. If we're talking about computers, then the life cycle is quite short. The rate of change is very short, might be measured in months or a very few years, maybe 1 or 1.5 years. If we're talking about cars, then we might be talking about 3 or 4 years. If we're talking about less exciting products, let's think of central heating radiators, then I guess they don't change too often, and we might be talking about 20 or 30 years, maybe. So the life cycle of the product has something to do with at least the type of product we're talking about. But in general terms, for all of those, the life cycle is reducing. Why is that? Well, it's reducing because of competition generally, the rate of change, and communication. If one company makes an improvement, then it's virtually instantly known around the world, and how it's done. So communication and the spread of ideas and globalization, that is, that you can buy virtually any product anywhere in the world and they'll be very similar, then that means that the pace of change and therefore the duration of the life cycle tends to be reducing. And if the life cycle during sales is reducing, then it puts pressure on reducing the design and development duration. And that's what I'm showing here in red. This line is, at first, it's talking about reducing the duration of product development, and that has implications lower down when we look at the activities. We've still got the same amount of work to do, but we've got to do it much quicker, which means that we may lose float, and it also means that we've got to do things simultaneously. We've got to speed up and overlap activities. Again, talk about that later. So we've got to do the same amount of work but in shorter time, which is why the rate of spend here is much increased. So we're spending money much faster. It's another interesting phenomenon that if we were talking about company A and that the rate of spend was as the blue line, then we might need 100 people, let's say, involved in that process. If the rate of spend is much quicker, then we might need 200 people at the peak. Now, most companies aren't going to double the number of staff that they have. So one of the implications has been that a lot of this speeding up needs to make use of virtual capacity through the supply chain. That is the companies that manufacture components that are supplied to the OEM, the original equipment manufacturer. That's people like Ford, say, who manufacture cars. They'll be the OEM, and those that supply to them directly would be tier 1 suppliers, and the tier 1 suppliers have tier 2 suppliers, and tier 2 suppliers have tier 3 suppliers, and so it goes on. But the importance of the direct suppliers to the OEM provide additional design and development capacity. And over recent years, maybe 20 years, their importance has become more significant. The other thing I'm showing here then is that magically we're able to sell more product. That's a bit strange. If we've got less time during which to recoup our investment and make profit, then that implies that we need to sell at a higher rate. How can we do that? Yes, we could grab market share from our competitors. That might be possible. That might help us. If we've got better products, we might be able to do that more effectively. The other phenomenon that's happened in line with the supply chain increase is that there's been the amalgamation of brands. So for example, if again we talk about cars, then you might know that the Volkswagen Polo uses the same technology as the Skoda Fabia, which is the same technology as the Seat Ibiza, which is the same technology as the Audi A1. Why have Volkswagen done that? They've done it because they can spread the cost of the product development across a number of brands, so they can give the customer apparent choice, but in fact it's the same product, as it were, under the skin, or very similar. Perhaps it looks different, packaged different, those sorts of things, but there is apparent choice. But it's not just cars. Lots of washing machines and other white goods, fridge freezers and those sorts of things, are made by Electrolux, who own brands like Bosch, for example. So again, their product development is spread over a number of brands. We'll come back to some of these aspects again, but it's important to understand the context here.